My name is Avery Johnson. I am a senior political science major at Adrian College. I'm also a now retired volleyball player. I am the president of the American Civil Liberties Union Club here on Adrian that was just founded this year. So what made me join Alpha was really me trying to find my roots. I really wanted to become more invested into what it meant to be African American. And growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, I had a really good opportunity to see a lot of different cultures as it was a very diverse town. But when it came to knowing my own culture, it was almost lacking and kind of non-existent to an extent. I had very close relatives who didn't really have the same knowledge base either. So I was pretty much lost. And Alpha kind of seemed like my oasis almost, especially when I got here and kind of noticed that it was a predominantly white institution. It really opened my eyes to a lot of the ill effects of racism and what it has on our country and our communities. And so Alpha kind of gave me a chance to really vocalize that opinion and form my own opinions on things that I hadn't even known existed yet. What Alpha has focused on in the past was really community outreach. They tried to do a lot of community events. We tried to kind of support that idea of unity across all races. And within that topic, we really focused on Black power and Black excellence. And that was pretty much most of the things that we would accomplish. There wouldn't be many big grand efforts to that extent. And I feel like that's kind of where the dissolution of the club kind of went forward. There wasn't much being done rather than the weekly meetings, and the leadership was sparse, so that kind of formed that to happen. Alpha has changed my outlook on college culture in a variety of ways that I can't even begin to comprehend all of them. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, as I mentioned before, I grew up around a lot of diversity, and within this diversity there was a mutual respect amongst each other. Everyone knew that minorities were treated differently by the justice system. They knew that people in different parts of the country treated minorities differently based upon the color of their skin. This was fact. It was something that everybody just kind of had in the back of their head, and if anybody spoke out against that rule, they would, the person who recognized that would actually speak out against that and try and condemn that speech just as much. And that was something that I always treasured and kind of took advantage of while I was in high school, because coming to college, my perception on young people in the world was that every young person under the age of 25, that 18 to 25 age gap that everyone always talks about, is completely liberal. We're all open-minded people. We don't care about each other's differences, and we're all happy. It's an idyllic world, all that. And I come to Adrian College and it's not. It's not like that at all. It's just like what your parents would tell you when you're getting the talk, as a Black kid usually does, as all Black kids usually do. And to come to a college where people, they treat you differently, and you can tell how they inherently treat you differently by the way in which they talk to their non-colored friends versus the way they talk to their colored friends. It happens constantly, and there are so many different instances that I'd be able to bring up, but I don't even know where to start because there are so many of them. I guess one of the more annoying ones, the basketball trope, the idea that just because I'm a tall Black person, I automatically play basketball. That's a small microaggression that may not mean anything at face value, but when it's something that you hear your whole entire life, it is extremely dehumanizing, because that begins to be the thought that that's the only thing that I can be in my life, is a basketball player. That's all that I'm worth. People don't say that I go around looking like a scientist or a doctor or a lawyer, for that matter, as they would with other white kids. But for me specifically, for tall black kids, we're nothing more than basketball players. So the comment may not mean much at face value, but it's so much deeper than that, and it runs so much deeper than that. Alpha transformed into Brothers in Action primarily because of the lack of leadership. At the time, the people who were in charge were very flaky, to say the least. There were meetings that would happen and nobody would show up. There were times where even the presidents and the people who actually ran the executive board wouldn't even show up to the meetings. And so that caused the downward spiral. The club started becoming less and less active on campus. You saw less of them doing things on campus. And then eventually the woman who actually ran the Alpha Club, Idali Feliciano, she ended up retiring. So the club dies along with her because there weren't any people who were there willing to keep it afloat. And me being a freshman at the time, that seemed like an incredibly daunting task. And not having the support of other black students on campus, due in part to the fact that there are so little of us, it just made the task close to impossible. So eventually, someone else stepped up to the plate, and then they changed the entire idea of what Alpha was founded upon, and they completely flipped the program and made it better and more active, and that's pretty much how everything transpired. Since my freshman year, a lot has changed on campus. And a lot of it has been in part to the 2016 presidential election, unfortunately. There have been a lot of good things that have come out of that election, and there have been just as many bad things that have come out of the election. And it's really important to point out the really good things, like people have become more racially aware. They've become more open about things because they see what hatred does to people. There are people who are starting to become a little bit more open-minded because they see the kind of hatred that gets transpired between two different groups. So there are things like that where the clashing, it's almost inevitable and it's necessary. But then there are the things that make it really bad, and there are people who feel emboldened by certain political leaders to treat other people a certain way or talk to people a certain way, and that is something that has grown on this campus. When I first got here, people were very reserved about talking about race, and they kind of shied away from the topic altogether. And since the 2016 election, that has changed tremendously. People talk about politics until they're blue in the face here. And it's great to see that, especially as a political science major. I really love seeing both the sides kind of clash and really fight it out and try and see, who's the best person. I mean, either way, in the end, they're both gonna feel like they're right and the other person's wrong. But it's still nice to see people engage in the topic rather than avoid it altogether, which has happened in the past. And so during this period of political enlightenment, I guess, people tend to get a little bit worse sometimes, and their words may feel threatening because of how they're coming off, or people get offended by them because of what they say. And then now we have this whole PC culture, the politically correct culture, which really spurted because people were tired of being dehumanized. And now things are trying to get flipped, and they're trying to put the blame back on the people who were oppressed, the disenfranchised, calling them out and saying that they are sensitive and that they are weak just because they want their voices to be heard. And that's not fair, obviously, because those are disenfranchised people. We as minorities are disenfranchised and have been for years and decades upon decades of disenfranchisement. And now we're finally getting a voice, and there are black political leaders, there are Hispanic political leaders, there are Muslim political leaders, we have women in office, women running businesses, and finally, we're challenging the oppressor. That's what's going on. We're challenging the status quo, and this is the bounce back. the Blue Lives Matter bounce back from Black Lives Matter. That's all it is. And that's an issue that we're dealing with all of the time. What I hope to see in the future is probably the same as every other person on this campus, for that matter, is equality. And not only equality, but equity. And by equity, I don't mean allowing black people to get in just as much as white people into the school. I mean helping them significantly more, because these black people who come to this campus, like the Florida boys or the people from the inner city of Detroit, they are coming from broken education systems that have terrible funding. Coming from the suburbs of Chicago, as I have previously mentioned over and over, I had some of the best education that you could have possibly imagined. My school has Chromebooks for every single person in the school so that they can do coding. Coding, which is obviously the language arts of the future, but there are schools in the inner cities and in very minority-driven populations that do not have these resources. They don't have anywhere near the resources that these suburban schools have. And that's a problem. So then you have these people coming from these wealthy suburbs to this school who can do just fine. They will do just fine because they have the resources, and they've had the resources to do fine in school. Teachers looked after them. Their parents were always around. They had help, they had tutors. These kids coming from the inner city, they didn't have programs like that. They didn't have resources like that. So having them come here and expecting them to do just fine and assuming that affirmative action stops at admission is a slap in the face to all minorities. It's showing that that's all that they care about. They just want to fill the status quo. That's it. They just want to make sure that you're in, and bam, then you have to just take care of the rest on your own. That's not how it works. When you come from nothing, you need everything to get better. And so those people coming here, they need everything to get better. And it's important that that's what the future of this campus is. It's giving back to those who've had everything taken from them.